Hello, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce myself to all of you. I'm Abid Hassan, Senior Assistant Editor with ETHRWorld. Thanks a lot for taking out time and participating in this exclusive fireside chat. Today, we'll discuss the topic creating a great workplace with sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. To share more on this topic, I have with us Aparna Mittal, DE&I advisor and founder, Samana Center for Gender Policy and Law. Welcome to the chat, Aparna.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. My next guest is Rohan Sylvester, recruitment evangelist, Indeed. Welcome to this chat, Rohan.
Thanks, Abid. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Progressive organizational change is imperative to attract, retain, and nurture a diverse workforce. And to create equitable and inclusive workplaces, every organization must curate, imbibe, and practice best practices customized to suit the requirements of a diverse group of persons. This is credible research. There is credible research to establish the diversity and inclusion that it brings many benefits to the company that enhance creativity, innovation, finance, better problem solving abilities, and etc. This fireside chat will look closely to the progress made by India Inc. so far in the DE&I agenda and explore a sustainable and long-term strategy to take it to the next level. On that note, I'll start this fireside chat, and my first question is for Aparna. Aparna, this is a very simple yet important question. What is diversity, and what might be the barriers to valuing diversity?
Right. Thank you, Abid, for that question. And as you rightly said, for us to understand what diversity is, we have to look around us. We live in India, which is one of the most multicultural and plural societies that we have here. And diversity from a corporate spectrum or from a workplace perspective is just means to have a wide range of people from different backgrounds representative at your organization. And when I mean different backgrounds, it could be gender, it could be caste, race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, the whole spectrum of abilities. These days, we're hearing a lot about age and age diversity, how people from different generations, their approach to work may be different, sexual orientation, socioeconomic backgrounds, language, culture, customs. I could go on and on. But really, I think diversity means that if you look at your customer base, whether you're a product-oriented company or a service-oriented organization, your real customer base should be reflected within your organization. And when you talk about barriers, I think two key barriers, which I think lead to people not understanding why is DE&I or diversity important. One is that they don't realize the legal, social, economic, and business case of diversity and inclusion. And I think between Abid, Rohan, and I, we will try and delve into that a little deeper, into how does that really accrue benefit. And because people don't see the value that DE&I brings to the conversation or to the agenda, they only look at the cost aspect of DE&I. So they look at both the time cost and the financial cost of DE&I, which is really looking at the short-term cost and not the long-term benefit of the program. That's one. And I think the second key barrier, which is a big challenge, is that a lot of HR heads I talk to and a lot of recruitment arms that I speak to, they somehow believe that DE&I initiatives compromise merit. And I think that is a flawed notion because DE&I and merit are not mutually exclusive. DE&I just means that you have good systems in place to ensure that people with the right merit are given equal opportunity. And we have to understand the intersectional impact. Somebody could be the most brilliant, accountant, but may not have the best English. So are you going to recognize that person for their accountancy skills or for their English skills? And I think that's why I think if you start looking at merit only from the prism of certain defined criteria, which we have traditionally, that's where the pitfall really comes. So lack of awareness and confusing meritocracy or lack of meritocracy with DE&I, I think those are the two barriers to diversity.
Thank you, Aparna, for very beautifully defining what diversity is and about the barriers as well, because we need to judge someone on merit and not other skills. So my question to Rohan is, Aparna spoke about valuing diversity. how important is diversity at the workplace to the employees? That's one. And how important is this for candidates looking for employers? I would want you to share both the thoughts from the employee
Sure.
perspective and the employers. Yeah.
Well, both the question, in my opinion, are kind of slightly related, but I will try and answer them both. Firstly, diversity is of immense importance to job seekers. And this is particularly true when you really consider those historically marginalized groups, right? The groups that have not actually seen the kind of success that certain other groups have. As Aparna was saying, the definition for diversity is diverse. There are different kinds of people who are held back for whatever reason, and they might view it as such. And for those people, when they are looking at an organization, diversity plays a key role in their decision making. In fact, we have done a study on this at Indeed, and when we were speaking to job seekers, 74% of job seekers think it's important to them to work at a company that prioritizes diversity and inclusion. For them, it is important. And it could be for various reasons. One primarily is a sense of representation, right? Everybody wants to see themselves in these organizations. For example, the diversity of an organization is basically a mirror into that organization's culture and how accepting of it is of differing views. And also by having these diversities and these multiple perspectives, you create a culture and an environment that fosters respect among employees. Employees feel valued and safe to share their opinions, and they can be authentic at work. And I think that's a very key word to remember: authentic at work. I think that's a new term, and I really like it because we have a very different you. There's a work you and there's a personal you. Some people are hoping that those two kind of transect. Last year's COVID kind of brought that to the forefront, right? We're seeing a lot more of people at home than the work person. But that authentic nature leads to a lot of benefits. It leads to happier people. Happier people are better for the organization, right? As Aparna was saying, there is tangible benefits from a business case as well. And this comes from happy people. And it can also reduce conflict resolution, and the resolution is easier of any conflict that might come up. And how important is it for candidates looking for new employees? Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at employer branding, right? Employer branding is a huge chunk of what employers do to attract talent. A big part of employer branding is companies talking about their diversity. And most importantly, not just their diversity, about their inclusion. The fact that they want to create a sense of belonging within their organization. Many global organizations that do this really well, when you go to their career sites, you will see just right next to the list of benefits is the list of like inclusive resource groups that organization you can be a part of. So it's equally important. And just to add to that, how important diversity is, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the ratings and review site Glassdoor. Recently, they've also added a new category to ask employees to sort of rate organizations on how the diversity of their current organization and or their former organization. So it goes to show not only is it important for people that they are joining a diverse organization, it's really important for candidates, and it helps you make these candidates take decisions about which companies they want to work for.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you for highlighting the part of employer branding, because that's very important. It's because the employer nowadays, they are promoting themselves not only in diversity, but in the other places as well, because the candidates, they are not beggars, they are choosers now. They can definitely choose which company to work with, and they can definitely score. Okay. So since you are a legal expert, Aparna, I would like to ask you one thing about diversity and inclusion. So my question to you is, can you help us demystify how an inclusive work environment is a legal imperative?
Yeah, absolutely, Abid. So I think I don't want to bore the audience with a lot of legal jargon, but just to put the framework out, we have a deeply progressive and path-breaking Constitution of India. And the Constitution of India is really the Bible through which all other laws in this country take, they originate from that, and they have to muster the tests laid down in the Constitution. Now, just from the perspective, because I practice both corporate law and DE&I, what does DE&I really mean? DE&I means four things. It means equality, it means equal opportunity, it means non-discrimination and non-harassment, and it means affirmative action. So if you think of these four pillars, which really what DNI is, our constitution stands for these four principles very clearly. And it clearly says that any kind of discrimination or lack of equal opportunity or harassment, anything based on caste, religion, gender, sexual orientation, etc., 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 is clearly illegal. Now, that's really where the core of DNI takes its genesis from. Now, let's move a step forward, because that's the macro law which governs all of us. In addition to that, the governments have come up with specific micro laws. So you will have something like POSH, which talks about workplace sexual harassment. You will have something about rights of persons with disability. You will have a Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. You will have the SC/ST Prohibition of Atrocities Act. So you will have a lot of micro nuances where a lot of these fundamental principles get enshrined. In fact, the entire code of labor laws, principles like equal pay, that you cannot differentiate for the equal pay for the same job based on gender. I think a lot of these principles are already enshrined in the Indian laws that we have. But, Abid, having said that, while there is a robust statutory framework, I must add that, in some places, the law is not complete. Like, for example, the POSH Act only protects women, or say we don't have a statutory paternity law in India in the private sector. But I think instead of hiding behind the gaps in the law, I think each organization, and that is my appeal to all the HR heads and management listening into the conversation, is that we have to understand the spirit of the Constitution of India, which talks about equality, equal opportunity, non-discrimination, safety, and affirmative action. And wherever there are gaps in the micro law, we have to step forward and create progressive internal policies to bridge the gap, and not really hide behind the gaps in the law, but really step forward and say, look, this is what we ought to do as employers, and this is what we are doing. Even if you go 5 steps forward, that's a great thing. But I think really the thought leadership is something I want to appeal to, that we will only see equality come into the organization if both the legal framework and the thought leadership comes together and tries to implement it into day-to-day practice.
Okay. Thank you, Aparna, for you haven't used any jargon, and that was really nice that you have put it very clearly and everybody understood as well. So this is more of a comment than question, and it is for both of you. I'll start with Rohan. So Rohan, today's business environment requires that employers make D&I a priority if they want to beat the competitive business and talent acquisition marketplace. Would you like to share your insights?
Okay, so I'm going to break this down basis what you were asking, right? There are the two parts. There's the business side and the talent acquisition side. There are a lot of benefits in both these cases, right? The first benefits to the business. Firstly, when you have a diverse organization or a diverse group of people working for you, you have better cultural insight and an improved perception of the clients and the customers and the people that you work with. I think Aparna said it best, right? The people that you're selling to, when they look back at the organizations that they work with, they want to see themselves reflected in there, right? So, and when we have diverse client bases and diverse people to work with, the reality should be true for the organization as well. And of course, the diverse perspectives brings more ideas, increased creativity, and can have a real impact on the work. Now, I just want to point out, while there is a lot of talk about diversity in many forms, diversity of thought is also something that we need to address at some point. And that has major benefits from a business perspective. And a lot of organizations don't even know that at times they are restricting it. For example, we as people, right, we like to find same, as they say. We like to connect with people who are similar to us. And that tends to create these in-groups, right? And we try to we put away anything that could potentially come from an out-group. And that affects us at every level. There was a story I remember about an Australian company that consistently kept hiring people from the same organization, from the same college. And then they found out that the leader of that team was from that college. And he was unconsciously hiring just the same people. So that's what I'm trying to say. When you don't have a diverse perspective within your organization, it can actually affect your ability to innovate. And not only that, there are tangible performance outcomes, right? Employers with a diverse workforce are more likely to have above average performance. Don't take my word for it. There was a McKinsey report recently which found that companies with more than 30% women executives were more likely to outperform companies where the percentage ranged between 10 to 30. And in turn, these companies were more likely to outperform those which had even fewer women executives. And it was a substantial difference in performance. I mean, why wouldn't any organization, when they hear numbers like this, what is stopping them from increasing the diversity, right? It's just like it seems to be a win-win situation that no one's taking up at this point, right? I mean, when you see the current situation and as well. Now, the same McKinsey report said the same was found for even ethnically and culturally diverse. Of course, it was a global report with global organization, but I think it has implications for India as well. From a talent acquisition benefit, it just makes sense, right? As I said earlier, just having a diverse talent force helps you attract more talent, helps you attract the best possible talent out there. And happier employees, reduced employee turnover. There is nothing more troublesome for a HR or a TA fraternity than to have a higher turnover, but happy employees are more likely to stay with you. And we can build diverse organizations and build happy people. And I guess TA folks at the end of the day would be happier, right? Less people leaving the force.
Thank you, Rohan. Aparna, your thoughts on the same?
I absolutely resonate every word that Rohan has said. I mean, no one could have put it as clearly as he has in both the two aspects, both the business or innovation perspective or the talent acquisition perspective. And just one thing to add, I think, which I think Abid you had mentioned, is that when I started working in 2005, there was a lot less information symmetry. You really only got information from your alumni groups or from your limited peer groups. The way the world has evolved now, especially with the Gen Zs and the millennials, the way information flows about organizations, I think a lot of organizations or colleges, students want to know about corporate policies and benefits before they join. What kind of question are you asking them in their interview? I may not have reacted 20 years ago, but kids these days or youngsters will not take those questions right. So I think it is important to understand that, you may have great corporate policies or you may have, pride-colored logos, but if you're not going to translate it into visible action at every point of interface where your customers or your employees are interfacing with your company. And I think just to mix the two silos that Rohan has set out, your customers are your employees and your employees are your customers. You can have very good corporate policies, but if somebody walks into your large store and the form you give them, it asks them something which is very private or it discriminates them, that person is never going to go and come and apply to your company for it. So I think we have to realize that, it really has to come into the detail of what you do, because it's actually left arm and right arm, your customers and your employees in some way.
Thank you so much, Aparna. Aparna, you mentioned in the last question, you mentioned about transgenders, about person with disabilities. I would like to ask you something related to the same. How can we develop a culturally competent workforce which is sensitive toward person with disabilities, belonging to different socioeconomic backgrounds, and the LGBTQ community? How can we do that?
Right. So I think, Abid, that I get a lot of clients asking me, how can they fix the culture? But I want to first reiterate saying that the culture is one of the key pivots. You need to have robust internal policies and systems which trickle down to every piece of paperwork or infrastructure. And you also have the culture. One culture does not get created in a vacuum. And so you have to have very clear policies. You have to have very clear redressal mechanisms. So if somebody does use a pejorative or a negative word about a trans person, what can that person go and do? Can they report it? Can they get it addressed? So I think minus policies and minus a strong anti-harassment or anti-discrimination disciplinary framework, culture will not change. And to change the culture, I think you need, again, two pivots. One is, of course, continued sensitization, empathy, awareness for people. Because it's not just about the person who's walking into your organization. At every point of the organization, people have to be sensitized. I'll give you a small example just to show how this pans out. We interact a lot with trans people. And one transgender lady was telling me that she was called to a massive MNC for a pride program held in June. And she was given a lot of honor, made to sit on the stage, give a speech, etc. But when she was walking in, the guard tried to chase her away with a stick because he thought she had come to solicit money. Now, that is exactly what my problem is, that you are looking at people from a specific prism. You are only going to train the 5 people who are going to be in that team, but the sensitivity or the empathy has not come across through the organization. So I think culture change requires consistent effort. There have to be training workshops. It has to be done across the spectrum. They have to be customized for the audience you are talking to make sure they understand. It has to be done in a simplistic manner where they can understand, empathize, and then react. And I think in addition to that, it is very important that you train your managers well, because you can have the best policies, the best thought leadership. But every time I go to my people manager, I need extra leave because I need to go for a specific medical appointment, as trans people have certain specific requirements, or there is some other requirement. Every time, if my people manager is going to be insensitive or is going to carry that bias against me or is going to make it difficult for me, then we will never talk about culture change. So both, I think, to summarize, would be awareness, empathy building, and also training your managers. And I think just to add a last point, I think what sometimes bothers me is that we have divided our work life and our private life and silos. I worked in one of India's leading law firms for about 12 years. I did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. Not once in 12, 13 years did I meet a single trans person in a meeting, right? So we live in these bubbles, right? That we only meet people who are like us and we don't meet anybody who's different. So how are we going to suddenly on one day create an entire understanding about somebody's lived experiences? So I think if people can make time, and there is a lot of way to do it, both through, employee resource groups or through volunteering or working with NGOs or volunteering time, if you start engaging with people outside the workplace, who are not like you and you're not in that bubble and you consciously break that bubble. I think, Rohan, you were talking about the same thing. I think your understanding of people and the challenges they face, they will become more real, because all of us are privileged in many, many, many ways. And you cannot just imagine what the other person is going through unless you are willing to humbly sit with them, understand, and learn from them in terms of what problems that they face. Because we are completely, and I don't want to use ableist language, but we are blind to the issues most people face in India, especially those who come from deeply marginalized communities. So unless you're going to take out those 2 minutes, talk to people, understand what's happening with them, how are you going to come back and change your corporate policies and make them sensitive and empathetic, or change the culture in the organization? So, consistent effort and micro nudges, they have to be built into the program.
But I just quickly want to add something. Firstly, I want to say, Aparna, that was a brilliant line that I think a lot of us fail to understand, especially all of us working from home, sitting in the Zoom meeting. We fail to see how extremely privileged we are and where we are currently, and we fail to see that. But just to add to something, to answer that, Abid, culture doesn't come out of anything, right? It's about the values that are inbuilt into the organization. And if you can build inclusion as one of your values, right? And it's not an overnight solution, right? You've got to start somewhere. For example, at Indeed, inclusion is one of the values pillars. Not, apart from the performance, inclusion is right there. So when you have inclusion as a value, what you tend to do is see every single policy through those values. And then you start seeing there are, like Aparna was saying, there are policies that help people without the privilege, but then there are policies that unknowingly hamper because we have not seen that this is not inclusive. There are things like that. So values are a big part of it. When you, as an organization, I think most organizations need to have a look at the values and see if we are actually looking at the right things, and then look at all our policies through those prisms, and automatically, hopefully a culture will emerge from. Culture is not a on-off switch. I think it's something that's built over time, over iterations, and hopefully we can get there.
Good point, Rohan. Culture is not an on and off switch. And what Aparna mentioned, that we are blind, I think we have closed our eyes and we need to open our eyes. And not only from the leadership to the leadership level, the culture needs to enhance regularly, and from CEO to the office guard, everyone. And coming back to our DE&I initiatives, I would like to ask you, Rohan, DE&I initiative requires a comprehensive and holistic approach and implementation. How are you integrated? How have you integrated D&I into every aspect of the employee life cycle, like from pre-hire to post-exit? Would you like to share something?
Yes, I think I can answer this question for the whole session itself because the employee life cycle is so huge. But I'll try and keep it very brief. I promise you. So from a pre-hire perspective, right? As I said earlier, from an employer branding perspective, you want to showcase your diversity. As an organization, as I said, we believe in inclusion. Showcasing diversity will help us attract diversity, and we showcase it in many ways. We have social media channels which are just dedicated to giving people a sneak peek into our culture, and everything is sort of is shared there. The inclusion resource groups that exist, all the different types of opportunities and support systems that exist for people who are joining our system, right? From a hiring perspective, and this is a big thing to talk about. Firstly, there many organizations have diversity goals, but they're not hard and fast. From that perspective, we need to improve that, right? We need to make sure that diversity is happening throughout the hiring process. And what I mean by that is you ensure that you create an interview process, a hiring process that removes bias, unconscious, conscious, all types of bias. How it's not easy for, and at the smallest level, right? The words that we put out there as a job description can affect who applies for your jobs. When I heard that, I am a content writer. I love to read. I know the power of words, but it really, it really shook me. Like to say that just by adding a few words, we can change who is more likely to apply to a job. It's a scary sentiment. We don't put that much effort. And one more thing we need to stop doing, and this is something we are trying to practice in our organization, is stop thinking from a culture fit perspective. The moment we start thinking culture fit, we start thinking in group. As Aparna was saying, we start thinking of people who are similar to us. There's that, I've heard that line in a thing, would you be okay going out for dinner, having a drink with that person? You shouldn't hire people basis that. That's not the reasoning. That's how you create people you hire people who are similar to you. What you should be looking for is people with different cultures who have the values that you have, and start looking at from a culture add perspective, not whether they will fit into your culture, but whether they will add to your culture and enhance it, from a hiring perspective. I mean, when you come to your culture, it's not only about HR, right? I have always seen this. People turn and they point to HR and they point to HR teams and say, what are we doing for D&I? I'm like, we should all turn around and ask, what are all our teams doing for D&I, right? It's not just HR that has to do. It has to be truly inclusive, pervasive across the organization, create open dialogues. And it's not enough to just be diverse, right? We need to take action that ensure that we're inclusive. I've heard that line, and I'm sure Aparna may have heard this as well. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, right? People you can have a diverse organization and not have an inclusive one as well. So we need to start thinking about that, creating ERGs or employee resource groups or inclusion resource groups, depending on the situation. For example, in Indeed, and this was very interesting, last year during the pandemic, when we started working from home, a new inclusion resource group was created, one for parents and caregivers, because we started noticing that they were a highly affected group during the pandemic, right? When they were working from home, not only were they working from home, they were doing multiple roles, and it was hard to do those things. So we need to build cultures which are like that. And it goes on like this, right? Many policies, many ideas, training, as Aparna said, all of this would help in building a more diverse organization. And I'm aware that Aparna would definitely have something to add. So just that brings me to an end.
Yes, definitely. I'm hearing this line from many years now, and we are waiting when both of them will invited to dance, not only for the party. Aparna, your thoughts?
I think I agree with Rohan that we can run entire conversations on this, because I think a couple of things, and I'll try and go one by one, is that our conversation today is a 30,000 feet conversation. I don't want to oversimplify D&I, because it bothers me when I see that people think that in 5 hours you can master D&I, with due respect, that does not work. Every group of people who are different from us require specific initiatives and specific customizations required to really include them in the organization. The need for persons with disabilities, and even within them, the whole spectrum of ability is so vast that I don't think a 5-minute conversation can really go into that. If you're a transgender person, if you're a member of the LGBT community who is not a trans person, there is so much to be done that I think my first suggestion would be, please don't oversimplify. Please don't assume it's a 30,000 feet job. You really have to get into detail, and you have to customize your initiatives to suit what is relevant for your organization. Because, my personal grouse with DE&I is that DE&I has become a very elite conversation. We have these, very great panel discussions and large corporate events. Does it really trickle down to every office of the organization in a rural area, in a semi-urban area? Does every person in the office outside your corporate office understand what DE&I is? It could be your housekeeping staff. It could be the people who come and provide security services. Really, is the benefit of DE&I trickling down? Is it understood by every member of the organization? That's true. And basically, the divide between the corporatized part of our India Inc. and the non-corporatized part, though it's part of the same company. And I think the third thing, which I think Rohan has already talked about, is that we have to understand that knee-jerk reactions or one-time changes in logo or workshops do not help. They are good for organizations which want to start somewhere and they want to understand. But I think that there is a lot of strategic, technical advice that is required to make your organization inclusive for specific parameters. For example, we run a lot of training sessions for HR members. If I run a session on LGBT inclusion, that in itself takes me 4.5, 5 hours, because we will pick up everything from pre-hire. We have to understand conceptual differences between the word couple and family and partners. We have to understand how do things work before we get into providing solutions to address those aspects. You have to first understand the gaps. You have to understand where the problems arise. And then you have to, from that prism, as Rohan said, relook at your policy and say, we never thought about this. And I'll give you one example just to contextualize this. We've recently started hearing of gender neutral washrooms, which is a brilliant concept because it says it does not matter what your gender or sexual orientation is. We are not forcing you to go into a particular washroom just because it's the binary. You can use a gendered washroom of your choice. And a lot of places in India, because buildings are old, buildings are, your offices are leased premises, you don't have the opportunity to create new washrooms. Very conveniently, a washroom designated for a person with disability, they take out the signage and they make it person with disability plus gendered, or gender neutral washroom. Has anybody ever asked a person with disability, how does it work for them? The reason they were made as specific washrooms was so that the waiting time could be reduced. Or if somebody was waiting the washroom, they didn't feel the pressure that somebody's waiting outside. And if they needed 15 minutes, it could be fine to take that. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, we have to get out of this 30,000 feet approach. We have to get into detail. We have to talk to the real people who are people suffering from the fact that our policies and infrastructure does not provide for them. And we have to take real micro feedback from them. And when you start integrating it into your policies, policy is a very, it's a very generic term to use. But everything from how you are creating your job description, what roles are you imagining for people? For trans people, why are you only thinking of housekeeping roles? Why can't you think of a director role? So right from your imagination, how are you creating job descriptions? How are you writing them? How are you shortlisting CVs? What is the inherent bias in the recruitment hand? Somebody looks at a maternity returnee CV and says, oh, this is not going to work for a sales role. And they just put the CV away. And, then you do the interview process. What questions are you asking? What criteria do you have? Are you looking at skills and ability? Or are you just looking at what you optically see and say, hey, this person is not going to fit into my organization? And then all the policies. I see a lot of companies just putting out a well-drafted DE&I policy. I'm sorry, making one DE&I policy is not going to fix something. Every policy in that organization, whether it is leave policy, whether it is your medical insurance, whether it is bereavement policy, whatever you have, you have to relocate it in the micro nuance to make sure that you are not inadvertently leaving out people, and to make sure you are putting in systems and processes in the policy which cater for people whose needs are different. Because again, their needs may be different, but they're no lesser than us. And I want to underline that. This charitable approach that, oh, we are doing so much, I think that needs to go away. It is your duty as an employer to do that. And then through, whether it is performance evaluation, whether it is the kind of milestones you're given in the organization, the culture, how are you growing in the organization? I heard from, one large organization which works with persons with disability that they give you a job, but you're going to sit in that same job for the next 30 years because they gave you the job, but they never thought of your own, career progression. And how are you going to keep somebody motivated if you have thought, I have done so much just by giving a job? So again, I think that we have to approach this with a lot of humility and not from a position of charity or, oh, we are doing so great by doing this. We really have to integrate it into every aspect of the employee life cycle. And of course, Rohan and I can talk about the pivots, hiring, performance, exit interview, promotion, all of that. But what is important is that every day the person walks into the organization or comes to the organization, to the moment they log off or they step out, are we ensuring that everything that is available to them helps them perform better? And it is at par, if not better, with what everybody else is getting in the organization. And if that's what our HR folks on this conference today can understand and go back and try and integrate, I think that's where we will create really inclusive organizations and not just a 30,000 feet conversation only. That's all from me.
Thank you, Aparna. I think you're right. We can't discuss and become an expert in diversity by talking for 5 hours. But I think let's move to something which is also important: diverse hiring. And with technology helping us a lot in hiring, I would like to ask 2 more questions because I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in for both of you. So my first question is for Rohan. Rohan, what are the best practices in hiring and addressing associated bias to digital hiring and automation?
Sure. From a hiring perspective, right? I think both of us said this before. You need to rework your job descriptions because job listings play a very important role in the talent that you recruit and provide a very important first impression of a company's culture. And subtle word choices can have a very big impact on the application pool, because there is actual research that shows that when you use masculine language like words like competitive, determined, it tends to have women less likely to apply for that job, right? And then we have words that are more likely to attract women, like collaborative, interpersonal, and you have these kind of situations. So it starts right there, the words that we choose, and it's easy to solve, right? There are tools out there. You go onto Google right now, you type job description gender bias tool, you can put your job description in, and it'll tell you, is your job gender neutral, is it inclined towards men or women, and then it's up to you, right? Most organizations, I would always recommend neutrality. The neutrality is what is the best outcome. You don't want to bias yourself towards either side. Even though if you think by going in one direction, you're actually helping agenda, it may not. You just want to keep it neutral, make sure the best person for the job, the right person for the job is found. The second thing is go blind for the resume review. That is a huge step that many organizations can take. Remove the identifiers, where they are from, their names, their backgrounds. Assess them purely on their skills and what they are capable of, right? We should be able to do a blind systematic process for reviewing applications and resumes will make sure that the most relevant candidate makes it to the interview, right? Then standardize interviews. You can't ask different questions to different people and expect an outcome that is equitable. And many cases, you have situations where the questions are basis visual cues, right? Something they noticed, something they saw, right? And you have to have standardized questions, standardized procedures in place to make that. Have candidates do a work sample test them for skills rather than past experience. Make sure your interviewers are diverse. I mean, I know it's going to be hard because sometimes organizations may not be diverse at mid levels and senior levels, but figure out a way, maybe get a junior employee to join a panel, someone who's representative of them in some way. Set diversity goals at all levels at the recruitment funnel. And another thing to consider right now is virtual hiring, right? The pandemic has made it a part of everything. Everything is virtual now. But there are a few benefits from virtual hiring uh, body language, many other factors are reduced. You can actually, we should, even when things do get better, and they will get better, I'm sure. But when they do get better, we need to continue using some of these techniques we learned. I think this crisis has pulled out a lot of good, and some of it we need to take with us and go. There are a lot of things that have come out that were not the worst outcomes, but we need to learn from that. And when it comes, and I noticed you said automation, Abid, and that's the scariest one, right? Because automation, the entire removal of that subtle human insight is good. See, automation is going to happen. It's what we need to be worried about is how we feed into it. So one of the things about automation and machine learning that I'm not sure if everyone is aware is we train these things. We create these models and then we give them a data set and we tell them, learn this data set, right? And then replicate this and make sure that we can follow this data, what we think is a good data set. What if the data set is not diverse? And then immediately we have an automated system. And what happens in those cases, right? When we have an automated system that's working off a bad data set, we automatically have people who put a lot of faith in it. And then it just widens the gap. So automation is something we need to, I know there is a huge rush to do it. And I am from that generation which was born, we had laptops, we had the internet, everything. And I'm all for it. But we need to be a little careful on how we implement it, because there is increasing research to show that the most marginalized parts of society are left behind when we do automations, because we use automation to assess large scales of people. And when you are in what we would call a non-marginalized group, you get that personal touch and all the human touch that goes with it. So yes, automation is going to be a part of hiring, but we have to be very careful of how it's implemented.
Thank you, Rohan. Aparna, I'll come to you. And very quickly, we have to address the audience questions as well. Talking about automation, talking about hiring, diverse hiring, what kind of data and tools are available with HR to evaluate and assess if hiring has been biased?
So again, I'll try and keep it brief because I think I can go on and on. I think hiring is the first point of interface with the organization. And I think the first tool, which is the easiest tool, is to train your hiring arms or your hiring folks to make sure that they have understood what unconscious bias is. And they can really, and unconscious bias is one word, but there are layers and layers of tools and activities that, like when we run our workshops, to really make people understand the multiple prisms of bias that they carry. And it's not just the personal bias they bring when they are sitting as recruiters or doing the hiring decisions, also the inherent bias with job roles. When they think that a maternity returnee cannot be head of sales, or, when they think that for a CEO, they need somebody who's 55 and really experienced and a particular, a gentleman who's really aggressive or, ambitious in a particular way. I think we have to really deconstruct the bias. And that is the first step. So, before we go into hiring tools, I think to work on the psyche of the hiring person is more important. So have good unconscious bias sessions so that your hiring managers understand the gaps and can address them. The second tool, and I see a lot of technology tools floating around, but before I go into that kind of cost investment for companies, I think organize good training sessions from credible organizations for your HR hands. Because I think if once they understand the gaps that come, I'll give you a simple example. When you're hiring for a role and you get 100 CVs, if you have got, 55 male CVs and 45 women CVs, it's fine. But if you have got 90 male CVs and 10 female CVs, that's a wrong. So you need your HR folks to stand up and say, I'm not picking up from this. this pool in itself is skewed. And let's change our pipeline to understand why are we getting a skewed pipeline of seats. So I think a lot of it is really detailed, which technology cannot address for you. As Rohan was right, technology will invariably replicate the majoritarian perspective or the flaws that we see. I personally think that, we have to really use a critical eye and a questioning eye to say not just why, but why not. I saw the example of IKEA Foundation. When they were setting up IKEA in India, they said, look, we want to start with 50-50 gender ratio. And, the example they brought out is that we could have started with 10 and 20 and found all the excuses. But the problem statement they gave their team is we want 50, find 50 and make it work. So they actually went into the rural area where the first store, and they trained women into running the large machines they use to, to pick up the furniture and stuff like that. So I think we have to remove the technology or the tools for a minute, and we have to work on the approach and the gaps that exist. And the last point is that I think most organizations we advise on hiring practices or on DE&I, we have realized that they have no internal data bank to analyze their own trends. Again, I am re-emphasizing the fact that what works for organization X may not work for you. Every organization is different. The size of growth of the organization, the scale of operations, the physical location where they're situated, the kind of work they do, the industry, a lot of that makes a big difference in your hiring practices. And I think what is most important is have certain data mined internally, both on qualitative and quantitative parameters. We all very easily float out an exit interview and somebody reads it and clocks it into the system. Has anybody analyzed the trends? Which team is losing the most people? Is there a commonality in the number of people we are losing? Are they all from the same gender? Are they all from the same caste background? Somebody really needs to pick up the microscope and critically analyze the data. So invest in creating internal parameters of data, create that data and analyze that data before you go towards technology tools to really ease out the process of hiring or retention. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now I think we can take a couple of questions. So question for you, Rohan. When it comes to gender diversity, women associates need flexible working hours to manage work-life balance, and that causes a challenge in many organizations. What should organizations do to ensure retention and offer work flexibility?
Okay.
So no, that's a trick question.
Yeah, it's a load. I was just going to say it's a very loaded question. Yeah, and of course you asked me, but yeah, no. Women associates need flexible working hours. I take problem with the term need itself. I think flexible working hours is something that should be given as an option to everyone, and then it's their choice if they choose to take it. Sometimes inclusion is not about taking a policy and then forcing it on people. It's about giving a policy and giving a choice as well. And I don't know what they mean by causes a challenge in many organizations. I'm assuming what they're saying is they're providing women associates work flexible, but not to male associates. I'm not saying it's right. The idea is provide flexible working hours to everyone and allow them to take it and make it very clear to the organization. Everyone's allowed to take it. So do not judge, sensitize them to the fact that some people might take it more than others for whatever reason. And the reason is not important. We need to create an environment that accepts whatever it might be. I disagree with any policy that applies to one set of people and not other. I think that by its very nature becomes a flawed policy. And if they are having retention issues because of it, I would say relook the policy. If people are looking at a policy and are feeling that it's not good for them and they're leaving the company, then maybe it's time to relook it. And especially, and it doesn't mean you take away the policy from that marginalized group that needs it. It's about, I think here in this case, it's a question of expanding the policy to everyone.
Okay. Aparna, you would like to add something? If you agree with Rohan?
No, I absolutely agree with him. And I think that this even thinking that it's a woman's job to do the domestic work and that it is her responsibility, and hence we need to adjust and make that allowance, I think there's a problem there because we believe in equal share load and equal parenting. In fact, anecdotally, because Rohan, you had mentioned it, for one of our presentations, I was Googling images of multitasking. And all the images that came up were of women. And I was shocked. I said, what? Are we saying men can't multitask? I mean, that can't be. We're not genetically coded to do more multitasking than somebody else. Multitasking is just an effort of how much work you have and how little time you have. And you have to constantly juggle. So I think that, we have to really, and with no offense to the person who had put the question out, I think let's not make certain roles or certain jobs linked to certain genders. I think everybody can do everything and we should push people towards equal parenting and equal caregiving.
Good point, Aparna. I have a question for you. So question for Aparna, in case diversity and meritocracy is not related, then why is positive discrimination not encouraged in private sector like it is done for government or public sector?
So I think, I read that question when it came in, and I think I want to break this up into a few parts. I think what I had said is that people think that because you are promoting diversity and inclusion, you are compromising on merit. So what I was trying to say is that, they, of course, they are linked. You will, but don't assume that you will bring in people who don't have merit. That was the first. And my second point I was trying to make is what is merit? When you define a job description, and when you say, I want, say, an accountant with, say, a CA degree and who should have worked for so many years, that is the core skill. But if you're also going to say that, this has to be a man, or this has to be somebody from a particular tier 2 city, or this has to be somebody who's extremely fluent in English, that is where you are creating artificial writers to true merit improvement. So all I was trying to say is that diversity and inclusion and meritocracy are not mutually exclusive. You will get a lot of merit-based candidates who you can hire. And I think when you talk about positive discrimination, I'm all for positive discrimination. But I don't want positive discrimination to be viewed from the perspective of charity. I want positive discrimination to be seen as affirmative action when you're training people, you're skilling people. And I'll go back to the same example. You may have the best accountant of this country from a rural area who may have topped the exam, may have had the best experience, but does not have the best English. Why will you not hire that person? I would hire that person on day one. And I'll say, English, don't worry, I can teach English. I can get this person to take a supplementary class if required and build that skill. So I think what I'm trying to talk about is that positive discrimination or affirmative action does not mean that you look at 10 on 10. It requires you to say that these are the core skills I cannot compromise on. Of course, if you want to hire a surgeon, you want somebody who's qualified to run the surgical skills, but everything else you can teach. So relook at how you're defining the role. Put in strong programs on mentoring. Every time I see the example of a guard somewhere who's doing a 12-hour duty and at night under the lamp, he sits and reads and tops some engineering exam, I ask myself, why are these people not coming into corporate workplaces? And I think if there has to be positive discrimination to make sure that gentleman gets that job, we have to do it. Because I think the prism from which we look at merit or ability, that is deeply flawed in today's society. And in fact, on affirmative action, if you look up, a lot of large corporates through their CSR arms are doing a lot on affirmative action, and especially on skilling. So there is a CII code of conduct, which was set up maybe 10, 12 years ago. And a lot of the large domestic corporate organizations in India, which are the large conglomerates, they have entire skilling programs set up in rural India. Especially where they have factories, they have a lot of marginalized communities where there is no education, high poverty, high illiteracy. There they have put in skill building programs and then done captive, recruitment from those places. So there is positive discrimination and affirmative action. And I think we have to take really a multi-thematic approach to DE&I and not look at these things as silos, but more as an integrated approach. If you can train people and do skill building and then hire them in your own organization, there is nothing like that. And whatever positive bias you need to bring in, I'm all for that to take them forward.
So my next question is open to both the speakers, and we are running out of time. So 2 minutes each. How much of an impact does a dedicated resource for diversity and inclusion have in enhancing the culture of DE&I?
I think it has a huge impact. In fact, that is the thing, right? We are within my organization. We have a built out diversity, inclusion, social responsibility department, We have a very senior person who's part of the SLT, who's part of our senior leadership team. She's on par with all the CXO. She's at that level where she brings that perspective. If diversity and inclusion was truly important to an organization, wouldn't we do it? We have CTOs because technology is important. We have CFOs because finance is important. But if we put importance to diversity, then we should have dedicated people, experts in the field, because just like anything else, we need experts to sort of guide us through this. We are, of course, unlike Aparna, I'm not an expert in this particular field. I'm more of a recruitment evangelist across that spectrum. I do know a little bit about diversity, but having dedicated professionals with the training, with the background, with the understanding and knowledge to spot problems in policies, to point out and keep us in line, right? Sometimes it's an unconscious diversion where we go. So, and sometimes it might be, for whatever reason, a conscious one, which I would not agree. But we need dedicated people to even have a look at it. But everything that's important has a professional. This is one of them.
I think just to add to what Rohan has said, and I love that question, because internationally there's a big debate going on, how much do you overload people who already have their day jobs in companies as HR or business heads, and make DE&I their role. So I think when you have a dedicated team to run DE&I, you benefit from two aspects. One is you get specialized advice, and also you are not struggling to balance out time and money allocation. Because if it is going to be nobody's project and everybody's going to just chip in for 5 minutes and run away, I think you will not take the needle forward. I'm not saying that don't involve people. I'm a big believer that DE&I should be practiced by everyone in the office, because that's the culture and the behavior and all the initiatives that take place. But in terms of who's leading the initiatives, who's curating the initiatives, I really think you need to have a dedicated person or a team doing it, because that is when the learnings get accumulated in a person, the organization grows, you learn from your own mistakes and you take it forward. Otherwise, I speak to a lot of CHROs, they are anyway overloaded, with all the HR compliance, payroll compliance, hire and fire, everything that happens. So really, it's a clarion call to have dedicated jobs, which are DE&I roles in the organization.
Yeah, and just to add to one thing, there has to be accountability, right? We can't have programs and no one's responsible for it. I know it's not a charity, as Aparna says. It is actual work. It has benefits for the organization. And if it has benefits, if it is valuable, we need to create a process and we need to have accountability.
Thank you. I think this will be my last question. And this is for Aparna. Aparna, can you please repeat the 4 pillars of diversity and inclusion? That is one. And does it depend on company to company? Like company can have their own pillars based on their business model?
Right. So there are 2 kinds of pillars. One I talk about what you need to have a comprehensive DE&I program, which cannot be changed. So that will, of course, be equality, equal opportunity, anti-discrimination and anti-harassment, and affirmative action. Because these are the key pillars on which you build any DE&I strategy. In terms of what can you change, I think the aspects of diversity that you want to pick up and focus on, that can change from company to company. Some companies want to start with gender. Some companies are already doing a lot on gender. They want to pick up LGBT. Some companies already have a focus on persons with disability. So I think that the horizontal pillars, if I may use that word, in terms of what focus area you want to pick up, understand, create initiatives, deep dive, and then give it that 3-6 months for it to, get implemented. Those you can pick up based on what is a focus area for your organization and what all you want to do. But the 4 pillars I talked about, they are critical to having a holistic DE&I strategy, because one without the other, it's not going to survive or create lasting strategic impact on your organization.
Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Rohan. I think you guys have summed up really well. And I think my key takeaways is certainly the thinking and discussions around DE&I are more expansive, and companies need to step up and take responsibility of such measures rather than proving, they should prove their inactions rather than by their words. And I think I have noted down a couple of points. Number one is there's no one size that fits all in approaching DE&I. People leaders need to customize their options according to the need of the employees. That is one, I believe. Second is equity is not the same as equality. You mentioned equal opportunity and equality, and we need to understand this at the as early as possible. And third point, I really liked what Rohan mentioned is DI helps in decision making, which is very important. So these are the 3-4 things that I've noted down, and I think you guys have noted down as well. And audience, sorry, we can't entertain any more questions, but you can definitely share it on our LinkedIn platform or Twitter or Facebook, wherever you're watching, and we'll ask our experts to answer it. I think thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot for joining in, and it's wonderful to host you.
And thank you, especially to our participants. I know most people are going through a very tough time. So, stay safe, and I hope everybody at your home is well. And thank you for just making the time and spending 1 hour with Rohan and me and today through this conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for taking the time. And yes, stay safe, stay inside. A lot of scary times out there, so just take care of yourselves.